us or something like that. But we misunderstood the relation to China, and it was sort of analytical error. The American business community had turned against the war. What about in the years up to that, there was just support for it.
But these are not people speaking because they've been told to say
absolutely.
it. They believe it.
Exactly. So
Well,
I'm saying
important.
the mechanisms are totally different.
Right.
It's the output that is astonishingly similar. Now, what are the mechanisms? Well, then you want to look at them.
Well, let's give you a chance to... the mechanisms might include General Electric.
Yeah.
The multinational corporation that owns the cable channel on which Professor Chomsky shares his views with us today. We presume that our program will make it to the airwaves without censorship.
And hopefully we will be back.
And we'll be back in just a moment. Well, one more time, Professor Chomsky, and you are, as I've reviewed not only the documentary, which shows you speaking around the world and talking to just about, seemed to me, every reporter in the northern and the southern hemisphere, you're remarkably patient with these similar questions. One more time for the highly regarded Posner and Donahue program. Here you are, the highlight of your career as a communicator on our program. America gets, mainstream media gives essentially the same message because why?
Why the same?
Yeah.
Well, we have to look what the message is. First of all, the message is one of remarkable subordination to power. Now, power in the United States doesn't happen to be in the state. It's not a centralized military bureaucratic state like in the Soviet Union.
Right.
Power in the United States primarily lies in corporations, in the corporate world. There's very narrow concentration of control over resources, over investment decisions, and so on and so forth. And that affects everything. It can't help affecting everything. It affects the government, because this means that there's a very close link between governmental power and corporate power. Furthermore, just the ability to make investment decisions and financial decisions places bounds on what any government could do.
Yes.
Furthermore, now let's go to the major media. What are the major media? Well, they're huge corporations. Okay, the New York Times, Washington Post, NBC, they first of all are large corporations, quite profitable ones, in fact. Secondly, they're parts of even bigger conglomerates, like, Westinghouse and GE and so on. Now, like any corporation, they sell a product on a market. This is a market, roughly a kind of a state-guided market society. What's the product and what's the market? Well, the market's advertisers. That is, other businesses. So they're selling a product to other businesses. Corporations are selling a product to other businesses. What's the product? Well, the product is audiences. Now, for the major media, the ones that kind of set the agenda, they're selling elite audiences, privileged audiences. The New York Times, say, is targeting privileged elite sectors of the population. That's their audience, and they're trying to sell that audience to other businesses. So we have to begin with, just on the most elementary grounds, we look at a system. Suppose we're Martians. We're looking at this system. We say, okay, here are huge corporations selling privileged audiences to other businesses. Well, what picture of the world do you expect to come out of that? Then we begin to add other factors. If let's say you're the chief diplomatic correspondent of the New York Times, or a pundit on the op-ed page, and you want to really have important insights into the government. Well, we all know how that's done. You have lunch with the Secretary of State. He tells you the lies that he wants to appear tomorrow. You write them and you say, a high source in Washington. My intrepid reporting has discovered that a high source in Washington said so-and-so. In fact, if you compare the internal declassified record, of, say, people like Dean Acheson's decisions, and you look at, say, James Reston's columns, they're pretty close. And the same will be true about James Baker and Thomas Friedman. And furthermore, this is an open secret. We know that this is the way. It's not a big secret in the journalistic profession that this is. Now, in order to maintain those contacts, you better present the world a certain way, or those contacts are going to be cut off. You'll lose your opportunity to have to appear, to have special insight, to have leaks, to be able to come across with a story, a couple hours before the next person, and so on. Plus, now, in order, there's an interplay here which requires power in order to maintain your own power. That's another factor over and above the just structural and institutional properties.
Go along, you get along. But to those wounded mainstream people, Jeff Greenfield of ABC News said you were from Neptune. You're wacko.
Not only that, but the majority of people in the Soviet Union by the late 1980s, in fact before that, would say to you, well, we know that these papers are controlled.
Absolutely.
We know. Well, whereas most Americans would say to you, Professor, give me a break. This isn't true. I have a free press. I get all the information I need.
The New York...
Are Americans less intelligent?
We report on the pollution of major corporations. We report on all these things, and here you are dropping this.
And
but
think about this.
I'll give you a chance to answer. You're not...
But this is a very...
Who controls this? You're not allowed to cut us off. I want to impress Professor Chomsky. They won't cut us off if I won't let them. Watch this. You have... from the documentary Manufacturing Consent, a very protracted look at Professor Chomsky's speeches around the world, his statements, and his social criticism, comes forward now a part of an interview that Bill Moyers conducted with none other than Tom Wolfe, the author, who responds to the question that follows Professor Chomsky everywhere he goes. Variously stated, it essentially boils down to, who the hell do you think you are? Tom Wolfe.
This is the old cabal theory that somewhere there's a room with a baize-covered desk, and there are a bunch of capitalists sitting around, and they're pulling strings. These rooms don't exist. I mean, I hate to tell Noam Chomsky this. You don't share that. I think it is the most absolute rubbish I've ever heard. This is the current fashion in universities. You know, it's patent nonsense, and I think it's nothing but a fashion. It's a way that intellectuals have of feeling like a clergy. I mean, there has to be something wrong.
Well, I actually agree with that comment. I mean, the idea that there would be a high cabal running things in a country like the United States is idiotic. That would say it is like the Soviet Union. It's totally different, which is precisely why I say the exact opposite. What I'm talking about, it's like saying the corporations try to maximize profit and market share. That's not a conspiracy. That's the institutional structure of the system. Individual decisions lead to that consequence of trying to maximize profit and market share. You don't do it, you're out of business. That's not a conspiracy, and it's not a high cabal. Now, why does Wolfe, or whoever it was, hear this as being a conspiracy? The point is that any analytic commentary on the institutional structure of the country is so threatening to the commissar class, they can't even hear the words.
Is he part of the commissar class, Tom Wolfe?
Yeah. I mean, he can't even hear the words. So if I say there is no high cabal, what he hears is there is a high cabal.
But don't you think the reason he can't hear the words is because he believes profoundly in the things he's been taught, that this is democracy, that there is freedom. It's like a lot of people like myself who used to be members of the Communist Party and who profoundly believed in the ideals and very painfully let go. Don't you think that there are a lot of honest people, Tom Wolfe being one of them, who profoundly believes in this, and he's not a member of the commissar class, he just has his ideals.
Yeah, but you see, what you're...
And you're threatening, you threaten those ideals.
But see, what you're describing in the Soviet Union is what I would call the commissar class. That is, the people who profoundly believed. I'm sure, you know, I don't know people...
Average people.
Average people,
Right.
but also all the way up to the editors of Pravda. If you did an in-depth analysis with them, how many of them would be total cynics?
Not many.
Yeah, that's right, because most of them completely believe. That's the way systems work. In fact, if you have the way belief systems form, really, if you think about it, is, you know, we even know this from our personal lives. You sort of decide to do something for whatever reason, and then you create a system of beliefs that justifies it and says, yeah, I was right. Well, the end effect of this is that people who function within a system of power and authority, whether it's an editor of Pravda or an op-ed writer for the Times or a concentration camp guard or, you know, pick across the board, they're usually quite sincere about it. And they have worked up a system of beliefs which says, yes, this is just and right, and I'm completely free and independent. If they couldn't have that system of beliefs, they couldn't continue. Now, the point is but I think when you point out that, I agree with you when you say it's a tight, closed system of beliefs. It's a kind of fundamentalism, which means you simply cannot hear critical analysis. And it's interesting to see what in the United States can't be heard. Ordinary institutional analysis, which says this is the way institutions function in a guided free market system given the distribution of power without any control, no control, you know, nobody's given orders and so on. This is the way it functions because of the way power is distributed. That's much too threatening to listen to, just as it's too threatening to hear the words the United States attacked South Vietnam or the United States orchestrated monstrous atrocities in Central America for those things. It's not allowed.
People get very emotional.
Because there are fundamentalist beliefs involved.
And yet,
well, Can we talk about, we have only about 3 minutes left, East Timor and Cambodia. May I ask you to briefly make your case there?
Well, the case is pretty straightforward. There were, I mean, it's